Well, good evening and welcome to this overview of Kepner-Tregoe and the Kepner-Tregoe approach. I'm Mike Allenbaugh. I will be the presenter this evening, and at the end of this, we will have a question and answer session. So I want everybody to hold off on questions until the very end because we're going to have to kind of rifle through this. This is a lot of space to cover in a short period of time. This is a presentation of uh, a partnership with Southwestern College Professional Studies and the Wichita chapter of ASQ. The Wichita chapter is the western two-thirds of the state of Kansas. If you have any questions or would like some assistance from ASQ Wichita, please reach out to us. There are many of us on LinkedIn. We do have a website that is available. Just Google us. We also have a LinkedIn page that is available out there as well. So one other housekeeping thing I want to mention is that the reason for this becoming a presentation was because of a video that was done a while back, I think probably a year ago, that apparently received a pretty decent response. The school wanted me to do a follow-up. And because of that reason, we're expanding. I'm expanding on what was done in that previous video. So this is also kind of geared toward those who may not be OpEx professionals or quality professionals of any kind. So I will take some time to explain a few things. For those of us who've been in the quality profession for a while, probably we already know, we already get that. But I do want to make sure that any of the students that might be watching understand what it is that we're talking about. All right, so enough of that. Let's go ahead and dive in. Here's the agenda. We will be discussing how flexible KT is, and hopefully out of all of this, I'm able to demonstrate how flexible Kepner-Tregoe is and how it can work in conjunction with other things that you already do. And this came out of one of the comments from the first video that was done about can you give examples? I talked about that. What did my examples? The college initially just wanted us to kind of demonstrate something that would be typical of what would be part of our class that maybe just didn't come out of a book, and we only had 10 minutes to do it in. So that's the reason that came about. But in this, hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that. We're going to obviously go through the phases of Kepner-Tregoe and discuss how it interacts with different processes. We will also look at some helpful tools that can be way. And these are tools that many who are in OpEx and in quality are going to recognize. The point of that, though, is this can help support some of those diagnostic tools that we use in this profession. And we'll talk about the KT question sets because that's really an important part of the approach. One of the things that makes Kepner-Tregoe so valuable is it tries to drive out assumptions, number one. Number two, it's also really good at slicing through ambiguous situations. And hopefully I can help with that, help demonstrate that tonight. And as I said, we will have some Q&A. This is the model that is in The Rational Manager, which is the book that was written by Charles Kepner and Benjamin Tregoe in the 70s. What I want you to notice about this is that the chasing arrows that are in the model aren't really going from phase to phase to phase to phase. They're just kind of going in a general clockwise direction. There's a reason for that. This is not a process. This is a cycle. And you may go from situation appraisal to problem analysis to potential problem analysis and then decision making 1, 2, 3, 4. But in reality, it's probably much more likely that you're going to go from one to 2 to 3 back to 1, or 1 to 2 back to 2. And that cycle, that part of the cycle, may happen multiple times, depending on the complexity and the size of the project that you are working on. This can be used in conjunction with existing diagnostic processes, as we talked about just a little bit ago. And as I said, this is not necessarily sequential every time. The reason I bring up that this is not a process is because someone contacted me at one time and kind of just, can you walk me through the process? That was the gist of it. Can you tell me how the process works? And my answer really was, that depends on your situation and your processes that you have in your organization. It could be DMAIC, could be plan, do, check, act, the scientific method, an 8D, whatever those processes are that you use to drive continuous improvement, this just kind of wraps around it very nicely. It begins with situation appraisal. In the original video, I mentioned 3 things. Tell me about, clarify, and characterize, as 3 things that you have to kind of mentally go through, make sure you go through these steps. One of the big value adds that Kepner-Tregoe has is that when you are in a situation and you're not really sure what's going on, it is excellent at cutting through ambiguity. You begin with, tell me about the situation. Tell me, just a big open-ended question. Tell me what's going on, okay? You will want to find your subject matter experts and kind of triangulate this based on that they're telling you. You're not going to get the same story every time, right? But there is going to be common ground. So as you come away from the tell me about, you will also want to understand where the common ground is with what you just heard and where the differences are. And it probably, especially in really complex types of projects, it's probably a good idea to write that down, okay? The clarify part is really about context. So when you're talking to these individuals, the different people that you're trying to get information from so that you can get a better understanding about this, it's important to verify that you got the context right, okay? Again, don't assume. Actually ask that question. Can you tell me what you mean by? Do you have research? How do you know? Do you have research? Do you have data, information, visual aids, failed product, those kinds of things? Verify that you're not just getting secondhand information. It's really what it boils down to, because you want to ask, and how do I know? How do I know needs to be based in research, data, information, fact, as close to fact as you can get, okay? So that's tell me about, and that's clarify. There are a lot of questions that are part of this approach, and we're not going to be able to even get close to really doing much in the way of getting in depth about the Kepner-Tregoe process. There are workshops that are available out there and people who can train you on this. I myself, when I went through my master's program, we actually were required to identify projects at our place of employment. And then the Kepner-Tregoe process, along with, or approach, not process, was combined with other things that were being taught, like DMAIC or constraint management or project management and so on and so forth. So here you have a big list of questions, and the questions are going to continue. You want to start with, though, and this is where I start, is just an idea of where we want it. I may not know how we're going to get there yet, but start with the end in mind. And the questions that follow will kind of set up the how we get there part, okay? So what information is it that you need at the time? What are the reasonable initial steps? How do I rank and prioritize these initial steps? Who can fill in the blanks? Who are my subject matter experts? And down the list here is a meeting appropriate. Yeah, okay. Just because you have a problem does not mean that you need to call a meeting. In fact, you probably should get information about what is truly going on in place before you call a meeting. If you do think you need to call a meeting, then establish the criteria, which is the third from the bottom bullet here. What's the criteria before you actually get a meeting going? What results do you want to come out of this meeting? And then lastly, what is in scope as part of this meeting and what is not? And that leads us to what we talked a lot about in the first video, which is how scope. This is another really big asset to Kepner-Tregoe because I've seen many, many people struggle with trying to define some kind of problem statement. And it either ends up being incorrectly focused, or it ends up being world hunger, or it's too narrowly defined. What you should rely on is the difference between should be and is. Just that's your deviation. Whatever is between should be and is, that's your problem. And anything outside of that, I'm important, but anything outside of that is out of bounds. It needs to go into the parking lot for now. And we will actually see an example of that a little bit later on. But there are two types of problems here. There's a change. So something was cruising right along like it needed to, and then all of a sudden the wheels came off. And then there's a day one problem. It's always been this way. We've just been, working around the problem, whatever the case may be. So that's some good information to have when you don't completely understand what is going on. What changed, or has it always been this way? When you're trying to understand a situation, that is a very large situation where things are happening outside of your facility that maybe you don't understand and you definitely don't control. A value stream map, which is a common Lean Six Sigma tool, is a very wise thing to do. Not the easiest thing in the world, but it is a very wise thing and good tool to be using in those kinds of situations. This is an example of such a value stream map that we used at a place that I used to work at to define what was going on outside of our process, not only outside of our process, but even in our process. And so for those of you who are not Lean practitioners, what a value stream map does is it not only defines the sequence of steps of your process, but it also defines all of the inputs and outputs that are kind of feeding in and out of your value stream. For each of those boxes, there are times that are assigned, and there are yields, so passes and fails that happen for each of those processes. Those are documented. The times of those steps are documented, and then everything in between has times. And at the end of it all, what you want to end up with is for each of these starbursts, these starbursts that you see on the screen, you should have projects going. You should have a list of projects for each of these areas that need improvement. That's the meaning behind that. And then at the end of the value stream map over here on the right-hand side is basically your ratio of value add to non-value add time. This is an actual, as I said, this is an actual value stream map that we did years ago with the company that I was working for. And it was very helpful. And yes, we had projects for each one of these starbursts that were there. And because we got a better understanding of the big picture, we were able to drive significant improvement in the overall operation of the company. From Kepner-Tregoe's standpoint, it's important to understand 4 dimensions of a problem: the what, where, when, and how. Now, this is not anything new to those who are well acquainted with Six Sigma types of projects. The difference here, though, is Kepner-Tregoe adds is not, does not, has not, those kinds of things. So as you go through the what, where, how, kind of either mentally have an image of a matrix, or you can even create one of your own and actually write in the considerations on both sides of the ledger so that you know what is in play as far as the discussion goes and what is not. We'll talk about that in a minute. Another tool that's very helpful during situation analysis, because you may not understand things and you may have to assign actions to gain better understanding, would be something like a ranking and prioritization number. This is just kind of an FMEA of sorts that I did years ago related to a problem that you will see in this presentation that can change depending on your need. What you really want to come out of this is some sort of prioritization of what's important and maybe what's less important. Not that it's completely unimportant, but that way you can allocate your resources to the things that really matter. And on the right-hand side, you see the complexity versus impact, high, low, high, those kinds of things. We're going to see something in just a minute that kind of helps explain that. Continuing on with the questions, we've talked about some helpful tools that you can use during the situation analysis. Now there are more questions that we have to ask as we approach our problem analysis phase. What do we mean by what exactly is, what else concerns us about, and these kinds of things. So you're still sticking with what right here. One of the respondents to ask for examples. And so this is such an example with a company that I was working with on a chip that was failing. And the description basically was just that. We have chips failing. Okay, well, what exactly is a chip failure? Well, poor audio quality. What else concerns me about that? Well, the device is used in other assemblies. It could be a latent failure. It could go to the customer. And these weren't just my concerns. These are concerns, as I said, with the subject matter experts that I went out and began kind of interviewing or asking the tell me about. So from their tell me about, this starts bubbling up, and I'm documenting these things so that I know what the considerations and concerns are. What evidence do we have that this is a problem? Well, we have functional test data and we have failed units. What different deviations exist? No audio and popping audio. So we have two failure modes, really, right? Under the brush of poor audio quality, there's this no audio that's there as well. So now we know a little bit more than we did. What decisions need to be made? Are other assemblies affected? How can we duplicate the symptom? What actions need to be assigned? Those kinds of things. And what actions, so that's the next bullet, what actions need to be assigned and are part of the scope. So remember what we said about defining the scope, should be versus is, right? Right, that's your criteria. Because now you're going to be setting up different test scenarios based on the information that you know. And it should be directed at the failures that you know about. What we learn through this process of asking questions is that there are 40 to 60% of the units that are failing. In other words, it's not 100% pass, it's not 100% clear audio. Where? In functional test, not the field, when it's a day one problem, which is something I didn't know at the time the problem came up. This is and that means it didn't change over time, right? So we're going back to what we just went through and kind of filling this in for you. In terms of just understanding a problem that really needs action, there's some questions that you have to ask, because don't assume every problem requires action. I'll give you an example. I've worked with organizations where customers have returned something for cosmetic reasons, but when you look at the specifications that are on the drawing or engineering specs, whatever they are, it actually complies. So in those cases, you talk with the customer, kind of work things out, but it's not really at that point a problem unless they want to change something that can always be negotiated. But in this case, you have a deviation of a 40 to 60% failure rate, should be versus is. You know that the rework alone is a crippling issue for test and for production. You don't know the root cause. You don't know if it's intermittent. You don't know if it could pass test, which could be a risk to the customer. You know that your cycle times have increased and you can't guarantee containment for the customer. So when you go through the do we have it, do we need to do something about it, and how do we know, those are the kinds of things that help you characterize, yes, we do something about it, or no, it really isn't a big enough deal for us to allocate resources and problem solve it. Now we're shifting to the characterize phase of problem analysis. Tell me about, clarify, and characterize. With characterize, you're going to do is not, does not, has not, within those 4 parameters of what, where, when, and how. A lot of the same thing as what we've been doing so far to cut through the ambiguity of a situation that at first glance we weren't sure what was going on, right? Okay. So we're still wondering what the deviation is. We're still asking what the deviation is and what has and has not the deviation. So in this case, it is a switch that has the deviation. We know, because we've done our research, that this component is used in amplifiers. Amplifiers don't have the issue. Why is that? So that's a point of interest. Now you're getting into the why of this. What is the deviation and what is not the specific deviation? Symptom is poor or no quality. The not piece of this is it's not damaged. That was a question that was raised. So as we went through and we were doing interviews with people about the situation, tell me about it. As is often the case for those of you who have been in this situation, there are lots of helpful suggestions about what may or may not be going on, what may or may not be the problem. Some of these were related to the product being damaged or just poor solder work, or it's a supplier issue or a bad lot. So as we go through all of that and just gaining understanding, it's important, and this is another really good contribution from Kepner-Tregoe, it is important that you have a way of eliminating that from the conversation. This is what my friend Ralph Ativo used to call signal to noise ratio. Focus on the signal, get rid of the noise to the best of your ability. Because of these questions and because they are specific, it really cuts through some of the noise, probably better than any tool I've ever used in my career. In this case, we've been able to eliminate, it's not damage, it's not a soldering issue, it's not a supplier issue, and it's not a bad lot. So what does that tell you? If it's none of that, what's it starting to look like? It's starting to look like maybe something in the design is causing this issue that you're seeing right now. Makes you question it at any rate. So what other deviations could have but do not have the issue? Well, if it's a problem, if it's a common cause problem, then all assemblies that would use this would exhibit the same problem. But we already know that the amps don't have this issue. Under what conditions does it happen? Only this configuration. So here's another important piece of information. This switch uses that component differently than the amp does. That probably explains bullet number 1 under the is not on the slide. What example do we have? I'm sorry, what evidence do we have, and how do we know? Okay, well, the data is specific to this one configuration, and it is confined to that product. There's another situation that I'm working on right now where it's 1/4 inch tube. What I am seeing with this problem is specific to this 1/4 inch tube. That everywhere it is, you're seeing this issue. So, but I digress. Now we're working on the where of is not, has not, does not. Where is this happening? Where is it not happening? Well, because of some of the noise that we were getting from different areas about, well, and this is often the case. So those of you who have been this time, it's production just needs to follow the instructions or something like that. It's a production issue. Well, we took this exact same product and had a firm in Arkansas build it and got the exact same result, 40 to 60% failure rate. So the problem will travel. It can happen anywhere. Where is it happening? Where is it not happening? It can happen anywhere. That's your answer. Where is the object when the deviation is observed? In test and not in the field. Why is that? Well, we learned that a couple of prototypes have been sent to customers, but when you look at the 40 to 60% fail rate, it is possible that they could have gotten some units that are working as their prototypes. So we're going to just kind of set that to the side for now. Where is the deviation on the object? The I2C bus, which for those of you that don't know integrated circuits and stuff like that, I don't want to get into the details of that, but there are a lot of different circuits on a little tiny chip, and they all have their own specific kind of function. And in this configuration, only configuration in the switch that used the I2C bus. Okay, no other circuit on the chip had any kind of a problem. That's why the amps weren't failing. So that answers the earlier question, right? Where else could the object have been when the deviation was observed but is not? It can happen anywhere using any lot and any supplier. Where else could the deviation be located on the object but is not? Any other circuit other than the I2C, but the other circuits are working just fine, so it's not that. And how do we know this? We created it at multiple locations using different lots from different suppliers, and it works in other assemblies. Okay. The when really doesn't do us much good at this point because we've answered a lot. Excuse me while I try to clear my throat. I'm getting a little hoarse. We've answered a lot of the questions already. The when at this point is just kind of icing on the cake, but at this point, we really these questions, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's important to get to this, which is the assumption testing. Ask yourself if the I2C bus, if blank is the true cause of blank, then how does it explain the is and the is not? In this case, if the I2C bus is causing the poor audio failures, how does it explain the is and is not? Well, the is and is not, if it's the I2C bus, it will be common to all assemblies that use the C bus in this configuration. Well, there's only one assembly that does it, but we know the not, right? Which are the other assemblies that don't use it and they don't have a problem. So by elimination, it's looking pretty good. Could the work sometimes, it could work sometimes if it's a margin issue. So if we are really pushing this to its limits, then yeah, it could work maybe for a while, but maybe not for very long, or work sometimes and work not, and other times it won't work. And it's reproducible no matter where it is. So that kind of explains the assumption test. And we know what it's not. We know that it's not solder damage, a supplier issue, and specific. So that kind of answers this question that is really important to ask when you get to that point. During the problem analysis phase, there are some helpful tools that Lean Six Sigma practitioners are probably pretty familiar with. Affinity diagramming, fishbones, FMEAs, spaghetti diagrams, Pareto analysis, hypothesis testing, so on and so forth, are all helpful tools, and more, by the way. And it depends on your situation, what tools you use, in conjunction with the Kepner-Tregoe questions and answers. Okay. For those who are Six Sigma practitioners, you might go with like an Eisenhower matrix or something like that. That's just kind of ranks things from a high impact to a low impact, high effort, low effort, those kinds of things, so that you can arrange things in a way that tell you, I'm going to need a team for this, or I can just assign this action to this individual and they can just get it done. But this is another possible solution and tool that could be used. And honestly, for each of the phases that you go through in Kepner-Tregoe, you're probably going to have some kind of ranking and prioritization matrix going on in the background. You may even have more than one, because you may have something that is related, like this one is, to failure modes and concerns that people have expressed. And you may have another one that helps you sort and prioritize the actions that need to be taken. Just change it and customize it to the way that makes sense to you and helps you manage your project. Now, I will mention on this, you will see that top issue, the capacity issue. What this does is it takes the internal risk factor and the customer risk factor and multiplies them so that you get 81, which is higher than anything else on the chart. Well, that's also out of scope, because it's not between should be and is it? So it's not that that's not important. We'll get to that. But it's also not what we're going to be focusing our efforts on at this time. Now, the problem issues, but we'll get to that. As you're moving into problem analysis, start with what you want to do here is understand what the biggest risks are. And then from there, the impacts and countermeasures that can be derived from what's been identified as the biggest risks. Understand how many problems there are, or potential problems there are, and the end state that you want to get to. You're beginning to build a solution. You have an idea of what that end state may look like. Now brainstorm. Brainstorm what the potential problems are and rank and prioritize. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. Based on what's defined there, work on the contingencies, because you're going to see these problems as possibilities. You're going to give them weight. Put together a contingency plan in case those problems actually happen. And just like in the other phases, there are questions that need to be asked as part of the potential problem analysis. What are the possible causes of the potential problems? What can be done to contain, eliminate, or reduce the impacts? What can be mistake proofed? That's a really good one. A lot of gains can be made there. What can be done to monitor the high risk areas? And what do you do if those high risk areas go out of bounds, if that's set by the team management? What can be done to minimize the impact, and what do you do to recover if these problems begin to happen? In the problem analysis phase, there are some really good tools in this as well. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on problem analysis or decision analysis because I know we're running short on time. And I did want to focus on situation appraisal and problem analysis, because in mind, if you're not on target there, the rest of this suffers. And in fact, it may not happen. You may not do any potential problem analysis because you never address the right problem. So probability trees and potential problem analysis make a lot of sense. Brainstorming, you can use a lot of different ways, however you want to brainstorm, nominal group technique, affinity diagramming, whatever. Action lists are part, just like in the other phases of Kepner-Tregoe, create your ranking and prioritization number, okay? For those that don't know what nominal group technique is, this is from the ASQ website. Basically, you state the problem, and then everybody has an opportunity to kind of brainstorm a solution for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then you get into the next phase of where everybody gets a chance to kind of describe what they have written down. There cannot be criticism. In fact, no discussion at this point. Eventually, what you want to get to is you want to have the ideas kind of grouped in logical ways, and you'll reduce them down so that it gets to a point where everybody can kind of score them, maybe on a Likert scale or a scale of 1 to 5, whatever you choose. And generally the highest scoring idea, the highest scoring solution is the one that makes the most sense to everybody, and that's the one that most likely to be looked at first or analyzed and made possible. So it's kind of a voting process that comes out of this kind of a session. As far as probability trees, you might have something like this. So remember the capacity issue we were talking about just a little while ago? Well, this isn't exactly what we did, but it's it's a similar situation. Help solve the capacity issue. Now you're out of the problem analysis phase and you're trying to build solutions. Well, this was one of the follow-on items after we did our thing with the chip, which really didn't. What it ended up being, just so you know, was that the chip actually had been configured incorrectly by the supplier, who was the customer of the product that we were building it for, and they had the clock speed too fast, set too fast, and so that was pretty easily patched. We discovered what it was. You just update the firmware and away you go. But there's this capacity thing that's still out there because it's a new product. We're doing a lot of things manually. Let's look at a new machine. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to create something like this, and you're going to assign possibilities based on what you know of success. In this case, it doesn't take much math to figure out that 0.6 times 0.6 is going to be bigger than 0.6 times 0.4, right? So your path looks to be diagram. New and top of the line is what everybody believes is going to get you the most bang for your buck and has the highest chance of success. Well, in the decision analysis, and we'll get back to that diagram because you'll see down here at the bottom there are financial numbers attached to this. Well, when you're just doing the probability analysis, maybe you don't have that financial information. As part of decision analysis, you want to create a statement, and that is based on what needs to be done and what criteria needs to be met. So in the case of the probability tree you just saw, the capacity needs to improve. We want to get to 1 unit every 20 minutes. Boom, you have your criteria defined. In addition to that, there are questions related to what specifically must the solution do, what other things would be nice to have, what constraints exist, what are the alternatives, and what are the risks. Now, this is organizing your must-haves versus your want. And it's very important in the decision analysis that the must-haves are met. Any solution that cannot meet the must-haves cannot be a solution. That's number one, which should be part of your criteria, right? So you're asking these questions to kind of help develop that. In this case, we need to improve yields and takt time, possibly, and more automated setup or higher resolution for the pasting operation. Budget time and skill sets are constraints that we have to deal with. Or just solder paste improvement is kind of a decision that we have to make, and we need to, at the decision analysis part of the model, now we need to put some money to what we're proposing. Scope it, timeline it if necessary, organize your must-haves and your wants, look at the complexity of each of the options, because that's going to potentially affect your possibility of success. And barriers there are to implementations. Identify any showstoppers up front and then score the rest. Treat that like your must-haves and your wants. If there are showstoppers, ask yourself, how do you know it's a showstopper, and score that, right? Ask yourself this question: why do we want to do this, or why do we want to do this, or why do we not want to do this? That should be how you wrap things up in terms of making decisions. Identify your go, no go, identifying all of your must-haves, organize it in terms of what's most likely to succeed, what's least likely to succeed, what's most expensive, and what's least expensive. Okay. Whoops. Tools, helpful tools here. Again, ranking and prioritization is a good one. You can flow things out, the different probabilities out, because you may have some process redesign that's involved, and some people and roles and responsibilities. Probability trees with financial data, which we just looked at, are real helpful. And then you are probably going to want an implementation roster that is defined at this point with their roles and responsibilities as team members. Excuse me again. This is a kind of a decision matrix. It's a helpful tool that you can use to weight different attributes that are important to least important, and so on and so forth. You can score different vendors this way, or whatever your item is over here on the left, to help you kind of rank and prioritize and generate a different kind of ranking and prioritization number in terms of your decision analysis. And in looking at your decision tree, now you're attaching financial information. Okay, so remember what we said about 60% and 60% being top of the line, most likely to succeed. It is also very likely that is going to cost you money. So when you actually attach the dollars and cents, what actually turns out to be maybe financially what makes the most sense is an entry level new or a mid-grade used. So just see how that changed just by adding the financial numbers. And you will want to probably organize a Gantt chart for the implementation. This is just kind of an example of how that looks. For those of you who aren't familiar with what Gantt charts are, this is an example of a Gantt chart and roles and responsibilities being assigned, and dates set, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we started with the conversation, and the objectives of this session were to demonstrate the flexibility of the Kepner-Tregoe model and approach, explain the phases, which we've done, but not in any great detail, I understand. We've overviewed each phase. We've given examples of helpful tools that I've used along the way in some of the projects that I've worked on, and we did go over the question sets as well. So with that, I think we are, look at the time here, we have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. And I apologize, I know I raced through that, but I thought it important to kind of get to this point of the presentation. Does anybody have a question or want to speak up?
Hi.
Hi, this is how do you pronounce your first name?
My name is Dave, but my name is Deyan is written
Okay.
there. I just want to
All
know.
right. Thank you for
I'm a
stepping up.
beginner in the Kepner-Tregoe method. I want to apply this method in decision making in non-technical sectors. Uh, Sometimes there is a many informations
Mhm.
that's not a technical, that's not a numbers, yeah, they have a many people's opinion also, in
Yep.
that cases, how accurate uh, result we can get. I know is and is not. Sometimes these are a kind of uh, process of elimination, kind
Correct.
of help us to go to the correct decision. But exactly, this is a kind of structure method. I want to your view that how we can apply this in the future, or what the scope it has in this field.
Sure. Thanks, and I'm glad you asked. Sure. Well, let me ask you. In your where you are now, in whatever it is that you're doing, um, can you give me an example of a problem
Uh,
without disclosing any company names or anything like that?
just like uh, getting some kind of big certifications, and there are many issues, and what we can get a kind of long process like 3 month projects to get some, and they have many kind of uh, requirement, and we already have some of the already established systems,
Okay.
uh, this is one I can give you very exact, but this is day to day I face that sometimes people give their own opinion, or some other places not so well correlated evidences, how to remove that, and how to find out exact this is the true reasons I can give. Okay, need need to implement some,
Okay.
yeah, this kind of things.
Well, I would say this. It sounds a little bit um, like maybe the the understand there needs to be a little bit of understanding as to if it's taking so long, why these things are taking so long. Is that a resource issue? Is it issue where uh, management, maybe it doesn't have management support, those kinds of things? I'm not familiar with your situation, but I go back to what is painful gets done. So if this is something that is shared, a view that is shared with leadership, and it's painful for them, and then those are the kinds of things that typically rise to the top. I guess it would be interesting to take a look at your certification process and the flow of it, and to kind of remember that value stream map that was up there at the beginning of
Yeah,
the.
yeah.
Okay, to
Mhm.
kind of understand the timing of that and where things are stopping, and kind of why all of that is happening. That might be a start to understand where things are bottling up. In manufacturing terms, you can walk through a facility, and just generally speaking, wherever the product is stacking up, there's your constraint. In a process that doesn't actually manufacture a product, wherever the documents, wherever the information, wherever, if people are getting to a certain stage of the certification process, and then it just comes to a screeching halt, that's your process constraint right there. And that's probably something that you need to, not you yourself, but as a company, they need to kind of keep that going as much as possible, to keep the rest of the process moving right along. But it would require that kind of, that kind of analysis to probably understand where things are slowing down. That's really, in my mind, what you're going to have to get to.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you. This I just wants to apply this kind of tools
Sorry, Dave.
as
Go ahead.
non-technical issues,
Mhm.
you know,
Sure.
or semi-technical kind of sometime only not to look the data.
And that's fine. And I think it's important for people to understand that every process has a flow, and there is always something that is an input. There's always something that's an output, whether it's, a physical product or not is irrelevant. There's a process that delivers something, otherwise you wouldn't have a job. So just understanding how each of those steps work is probably a pretty important thing for you to look at.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
This is Seth Merrill.
Hey, Seth.
First, I want to thank you for allowing ASQ to piggyback on this. This is great.
You're welcome.
And I've never heard of this method before.
Mhm.
Always the traditional Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, theory of constraints, etc.
Right.
Now I'm gonna make some comments and maybe a little back and forth discussion here. My business is a government business, and what you seem to say over here is there has to be that situational awareness. I think maybe it's another terminology. Maybe I'm off a little bit, but to me it seems like there's that situational awareness that you have to know not just what your product or your service is, but what's affecting the delivery of that, the output of that. What are those outside considerations is what I'm thinking. Now, when we in my area of government,
I'm sorry, you cut off right there, Seth.
sorry, I've been trying to switch back and forth
That's okay.
between routers. I seem to have a bad internet right now. So it seems as though we have to consider many things. What we do to start is I wouldn't consider it a full value stream map. We do a process map. We look at how long it takes to do something, do the activity, the task. How long does it take to get from point A to point B? And what are the influencers along the way? In fact, if we got somebody that is working on an item, what we're looking at is a mix here. You would not think that what we do is a manufacturing principle, but it is. And I'll tell you that it's part of Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. So when we get an applicant that comes in and says, hey, I want whatever the status might be, they put in that application. It's like a manufacturing process that we do at a big center before it even goes to the field office where the applicant might go to finish their processing. Think of it like manufacturing a vehicle. It goes from the Ford manufacturing plant to the dealership. At the dealership, you go there, you pick your car, it's done. With us, it's similar. You submit your information, it goes through this whole process, and once it's done, it goes on to the adjudication system for them to finish it up and to customize that with the individual out in the field at the field office, manufacturing, the retail store. So it's kind of like a combination of manufacturing and a service industry. So when you talked about, and I might have the words wrong again, but I took it as a situational awareness of what's going on that either slows down the process or inhibits the process, bottlenecks, etc. Where are those constraints along the line? And I see a lot of things in this where the gentleman that was just asking a question,
Right.
I don't necessarily have to use Six Sigma to get into the full data details. With this, I can look at those things. I can analyze what's going on. Yes, I do need quantitative data sets, and the qualitative side helps me justify those data points, like going on site and visually observing something that is going on when the data is telling you, yes, there is something, but you're really not sure. And going on site doing the observation, you see that. Well, this is where those maps, those flow maps, those process maps, those value stream maps come in handy. Now, if there's an impact, so in our case, situational awareness is, hey, we're trying to figure out what our manufacturing is going to be for certain form types. There are multiple forms that, like there are multiple vehicle models.
Yeah.
So what's going to affect that? And we look at this and say, let's analyze what's going on. What's the production going to be for next year? And a vehicle manufacturer, an aircraft manufacturer, electronics manufacturer is doing the exact same thing. So now it's a decision, is my production going to go down or is it going to go up? And for example, today on the phone call with somebody, I said, well, let's look at it like this. We've had the political environments change. So that is situational awareness, where is that going to affect the number of applications increasing for lawful immigration? Could very well.
Right.
If that happens, are you prepared for it? Do you have the number of people to do the work?
Right. Right. And, I think you bring up I think you bring up a good point that Dave was asking about earlier. This is a good example of a non-technical issue where these kinds of things can be applied. And, in your case, you guys have a good idea of how many cases you can process, on a weekly basis, monthly basis, so on and so forth, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And based on what you were just talking about, now you're thinking, well, so what potential problems is this going to create? And that's part of what we went through. And by how much?
And what's the risk involved?
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
If I can't keep up with the work, what's the risks of backlog? If the officers are pressured into increasing the rate at which they're going, what's the chance of failure or errors? What are all the alternatives that we have that could ease this, or that could make things better? Right.
And those are all good considerations and for the situation that you're in. Does anybody else, I'm going to ask if anybody else has a quick question. We're running pretty close on time to our hour, and I don't know, if this is going to stop or if we're going to be allowed to continue, but anybody else have something real quick? Okay. All right. Well, that is going to do it. I appreciate your guys' time, and thank you for the opportunity to share more information about trade. If you have any questions, just contact me directly. Thank you again. And for those of you who are online, I'm going to stop recording. You can stay online if you'd like and ask more questions.